Thanks for being here and listening. This is your chance to switch off, slow down, and listen to the life of another. Each episode we give voice to someone from history or myth. Not the version told in textbooks or legends, but their own quiet reflection. Today we hear from Medusa, a name wrapped in warnings and whispered in fear. But beneath the snake-haired monster is a woman whose story was stolen and twisted. Now she finally speaks for herself, remembering what it was like to be seen, blamed, and transformed. This is My Name Was Medusa.
Memory is a strange garden where some flowers bloom eternal while others wither before they've truly taken root. I find myself wondering, in this place beyond time, what remains when the stories others tell about you become the only truth the world knows. What becomes of the woman beneath the monster, the girl who once braided flowers into her hair before it became something else entirely? My name was Medusa. Perhaps you know it already, whispered in warnings, carved into stone, painted on shields as protection against evil. But names, like memories, can be both blessing and curse. Mine has outlived me by millennia, yet I wonder if anyone truly knew what it meant to carry it. I was born on an island where the sea kissed cliffs of white stone, where olive groves rustled silver in the Mediterranean wind. The scent of wild thyme and salt air filled my earliest breaths. My sisters and I, Stheno and Euryale, we ran barefoot through groves where ancient trees had stood since before men learned to write our stories down. We were the daughters of sea and earth, born of powers older than the gods who would later reshape our fate. Those early years taste of honeycakes cooling on stone windowsills, of warm sand between my toes, of my mother's voice humming lullabies that seemed to make the very waves dance. I remember the weight of my hair, thick, dark curls that caught the sunlight like captured starlight. My sisters would weave sea flowers into those curls, laughing as I spun in circles, feeling beautiful and beloved and utterly safe in my own skin. We were priestesses then, devoted to Athena of the bright eyes and steady wisdom. Her temple stood on the highest point of our island, its marble columns gleaming white against the endless blue sky. I loved the ritual of service, the careful preparation of offerings, the whispered prayers that rose like incense, the cool touch of marble beneath my palms as I cleaned her sacred spaces. There was peace in devotion, a sense of purpose that settled around my shoulders like a familiar cloak. The work was gentle, tending the sacred flame, weaving cloth for her statue, grinding grain for the temple's daily bread. My hands knew the texture of barley flour, the warmth of olive oil, the smooth coolness of polished bronze. I would rise before dawn to tend the flame, watching as the first light crept across the marble floor, painting everything in shades of rose and gold. Those moments felt holy, not because of grand miracles, but because of their quiet perfection. I remember one morning in particular when I was perhaps 18 summers old. The dawn was especially beautiful that day, with clouds painted in soft purples and pinks that reflected in the still temple pools. I had just finished my morning duties and was standing in the courtyard, feeling the cool morning air on my skin, when I realised how deeply content I was. It was such a simple thing, contentment, but it filled me like warm wine, making everything seem luminous and blessed. The other priestesses were like sisters to me. We shared our meals, our prayers, our small daily joys and sorrows. There was Alexia, who had a gift for making anyone laugh, and quiet Penthesilea, who could predict storms by the way birds flew. We would spend our free afternoons sitting by the sea, mending temple linens while the waves provided a gentle rhythm to our conversations. Those were the days when laughter came easily, when the future seemed as endless and welcoming as the horizon. But gods, I learned, are not always kind to those who serve them faithfully. Poseidon came to the temple on a day when storm clouds gathered like bruises across the sky. The sea churned restless and wild, and the very air seemed to crackle with his presence. He was power incarnate, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the colour of deep ocean, and hair that moved like kelp in an invisible current. When he looked at me, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, though whether from his divine power or something else entirely, I could not say. I had been alone in the inner sanctum, polishing the bronze fittings of Athena's altar, when he entered. The sacred space felt suddenly too small, too charged with energies I didn't understand. He spoke my name, and it sounded different in his voice, heavier, more dangerous. I should have been honoured by his attention, should have felt blessed that a god had noticed me. Instead, something deep in my belly twisted with unease. What happened next? I have carried the weight of it for eternities. He reached for me with hands that smelled of brine and seaweed, and I found myself backing against Athena's altar, my heart beating so fast I thought it might burst. The marble was cold against my spine, a sharp contrast to the overwhelming heat of his presence. I whispered Athena's name, a prayer, a plea for protection, but the goddess remained silent. The violation happened on sacred ground, beneath the painted eyes of Athena's statue. I remember the taste of salt, whether from tears or the spray of his ocean essence I could never be sure. I remember how the smooth marble floor bruised my knees, how my carefully braided hair came undone and scattered across the temple stones. I remember thinking, over and over, that this could not be happening. Not here. Not in the place I had devoted my life to serving. When it was over, Poseidon left as suddenly as he had come, the temple falling into a silence so complete it felt like death. I lay there on the cold marble for what felt like hours, too shocked to move, too broken to weep. The sacred flame still burned in its bronze bowl, the incense still curled toward the ceiling, but everything had changed. The safety I had known, the peace I had cultivated, it was gone, shattered like pottery dropped on stone. I waited for Athena to comfort me, to offer some sign that I was still worthy of her protection. Instead, when she finally appeared, her grey eyes were cold as winter storms. The transformation came at sunset 3 days later. I was alone again in the temple, trying to pray, trying to understand why my goddess would not speak to me. My hair felt strange against my shoulders, heavier somehow, and when I reached up to touch it, my fingers met something that was no longer soft curls, but something else entirely, something that moved. The change crept over me like a tide, slow and inexorable. My hair writhed and hissed, each curl becoming a serpent with eyes like tiny jewels and scales that caught the dying light. My skin grew pale as moonlight, then harder, taking on a strange luminescence. When I caught sight of my reflection in the temple's polished bronze, I barely recognised the creature looking back at me. But it was my eyes that held the cruelest gift. Eyes that had once looked upon beauty with joy, now carried death in their gaze. The first time I saw my new reflection, I understood immediately what I had become, not blessed, cursed, not chosen for honour, marked for exile. The worst part was the silence that followed. None of my sister priestesses would look at me directly. They brought me food and water, left offerings at a careful distance, but the easy companionship we had shared was gone forever. I had become something to be feared, something that reminded them all how quickly a life could be destroyed by the whims of gods. I left the temple on a night when the moon was dark, wrapping my head in heavy cloth to hide what my hair had become. My sisters, my blood sisters, came with me. their own transformations making them my only remaining companions. We found a cave on the far edge of the world where few mortals dared to venture, and there we made our home among shadows and stone. The cave was not without its own austere beauty. Stalactites hung like frozen tears from the ceiling, and underground pools reflected what little light filtered down from above. We made it comfortable in our way, soft furs for sleeping, clay vessels for water, a small fire pit where we could cook the fish Steno caught in the coastal waters. It was not the life any of us had imagined, but it was ours. The loneliness was the hardest burden to bear. We had each other, yes, but the easy intimacy with other beings was gone forever. No more shared meals with the other priestesses, no more lazy afternoons listening to the village children's laughter, no more simple human connection that I had never thought to treasure until it was lost. Sometimes fishermen would venture too close to our rocky shore, and I would catch glimpses of their lives, wives waiting for them to return, children playing in tidal pools, the uncomplicated joy of people who could look upon each other without fear. I envied them their ordinary troubles, their mortal concerns. They worried about storms and harvests, and whether their children would find good marriages. I worried about accidentally turning some lost soul to stone with an unguarded glance. The years passed differently in that place. Without the rhythms of temple life, without festivals and seasons marked by human celebration, time became fluid, dreamlike. I measured its passage by the changing light through the cave mouth, by the way the sea carved new patterns in the rocks, by the slow accumulation of dust on the stone figures that had once been living men. For yes, they came sometimes, heroes seeking glory, young men who had heard stories of the monster and thought themselves brave enough to face me. They would arrive with polished shields and sharp swords, calling out challenges that echoed in the cave's depths. I learned to recognise the particular quality of footsteps that belonged to someone hunting rather than someone lost. The hunters moved differently, with purpose and false confidence that rang hollow in the stone chambers. I never wanted to kill them. Each time I heard those footsteps approaching, I would call out warnings, begging them to leave, to return to whatever lives waited for them beyond my cursed shore. But they never listened. They came seeking a monster, and perhaps they needed to find one to make sense of their stories. The transformations happened in an instant. One moment there would be a young man breathing hard from his climb up the rocky path, sword raised and eyes bright with determination. The next, only cold stone remained, beautiful, terrible stone that captured forever the last expression they had worn in life. Surprise usually, sometimes fear, once, memorably, something that might have been pity. I kept them all. My garden of stone heroes grew over the decades, each figure positioned carefully among the rocks and tide pools. They were company of a sort, these silent witnesses to the curse I carried. In the long winter months, when storms kept even the fishermen far from shore, I would move among them, touching their carved faces, wondering about the lives they had left behind. Did mothers weep for these lost sons? Did lovers wait in vain for their return? There were times when the isolation nearly drove me to madness. I would find myself talking to the stone figures, telling them stories of the world I remembered, describing the taste of fresh bread or the sound of temple bells. My sisters tried to comfort me, but they had their own griefs to bear, their own adaptations to make. We loved each other, but love alone could not fill the vast emptiness that had opened in our lives. The seasons taught me patience. Spring brought small wildflowers that grew in the cracks between the rocks, and I learned to tend them with careful hands. Summer brought warm afternoons when I could sit by the cave mouth and watch dolphins play in the distant waves. Autumn painted the few scraggly trees in shades of gold and rust. Winter wrapped everything in grey mist and the constant sound of waves against stone. I discovered strange graces in that life, the way moonlight could transform the stone figures into something almost alive, the particular blue of the sea just before dawn, the taste of wild berries that grew despite the salt wind, small beauties that no one would write songs about, but which sustained something essential in my spirit. My hair, my serpent hair, became less frightening with time. I learned the individual temperaments of each snake, their preferences and moods. Some liked to be stroked gently behind their tiny heads. Others preferred to be left alone unless feeding time. They became, in their way, pets of a sort, companions who could not leave me, bound as they were to my flesh and fate. I began to understand that the curse had not only taken things from me, it had also revealed things. Without the distractions of ordinary life, I had time to think deeply, to observe the world with the kind of attention usually reserved for scholars and mystics. I watched the migration patterns of birds, noted how the tides change with the moon's phases, studied the way light moved across water at different times of day. There was a kind of freedom in being feared. No one expected anything of me anymore, no duties to perform, no social conventions to follow, no need to make myself pleasing or useful to others. I could simply exist, moment by moment, finding what small contentments were available. It was not the life I had dreamed of, but it was the life I had, and I learned to inhabit it fully. The longing for touch was perhaps the cruelest aspect of the curse, to be forever unable to offer comfort or receive it, to know that my very presence brought danger to any living thing. This isolation cut deeper than any physical wound. I would sometimes dream of my mother's gentle hands braiding my hair, or of falling asleep surrounded by my sister priestesses after a day of shared work. I would wake to find my stone-cursed fingers reaching for warmth that was not there. But there were unexpected moments of beauty too. Once a baby seal became separated from its mother and washed up near our cave. I found it crying on the rocks, too young and weak to return to the sea. For 3 days I nursed it with fish I caught in the shallow pools, careful always to keep my eyes averted. When its mother finally came searching and the two were reunited, their joyful reunion seemed to light up the entire coastline. I had helped something without destroying it, had participated in love rather than death. Another time, a storm drove a ship so close to our rocks that I could hear the sailors singing to keep their spirits up as they fought the waves. Their voices rose above the wind, raw and strong and utterly human. I stood hidden in the cave mouth, listening to their work songs and sea chanties, and for those few hours I felt connected to the world beyond my exile. They passed safely, never knowing how their music had blessed a creature they would have feared to see. The years accumulated like layers of pearl, each one adding a thin film of acceptance over the sharp core of loss. I learned to find meditation in small tasks, weaving grass into baskets, polishing stones until they gleamed, tending the tiny garden of succulents that somehow thrived in the salt air. My hands, which had once known the rituals of temple service, found new rhythms in these simple works. I thought often about Athena, trying to understand her judgment. Had she truly believed I was complicit in my own violation, or had she simply needed someone to punish and found me convenient? I came to think that gods, for all their power, might be more like mortals than they would admit, capable of jealousy, of unfairness, of making decisions based on pride rather than wisdom. This understanding brought neither comfort nor bitterness, only a kind of weary clarity. The day Perseus came, I knew immediately he was different from the others. His footsteps carried confidence but not cruelty, purpose but not arrogance. When he called out, his voice held respect rather than challenge. He spoke my name without sneering, acknowledged my personhood even as he announced his intention to kill me. I found myself almost grateful for his courtesy. After so many years of being treated as nothing more than a monster to be slain, his simple recognition of my humanity felt like an unexpected gift. I answered him from the shadows, warning him as I had warned all the others, but knowing somehow that this conversation would end differently. He was clever, this young hero, and better prepared than most. He approached using his polished shield as a mirror, never looking at me directly. I watched my own reflection wavering in its bronze surface, pale and terrible and sad. For a moment I saw myself as others saw me, and I understood why mothers used my name to frighten children into obedience. When his sword found my neck, the pain was sharp but brief. More startling was the relief that flooded through me in those final moments. The curse was ending. The long exile was over. Whatever came next, whether oblivion or transformation or some other mystery, it had to be better than the loneliness I was leaving behind. As my blood pooled on the rocky ground, I felt something stirring within it. Pegasus, the winged horse, emerged from my death like a star being born. Beautiful and pure and free, he rose into the sky with powerful beats of snow-white wings. If something so magnificent could come from my ending, then perhaps my life had not been entirely without purpose. Perhaps even monsters could give birth to wonder. My head, severed from my body, retained its power. Perseus carried it away to work great deeds, and later it found its way onto Athena's shield, where it became a symbol of protection rather than destruction. There is irony there that I find oddly comforting. The face that brought death in life became a guardian in death, turned from curse to blessing. Now, in this place beyond time, I watch the world continue without me. My story has been told and retold, changed and embellished and simplified, until the woman I was has been almost entirely forgotten. I am remembered as a monster, a cautionary tale, a symbol of feminine rage and divine punishment. These are not untrue exactly, but they are not complete. I was also a girl who loved the smell of baking bread and the feel of cool marble under her palms. I was a priestess who found joy in small services, a sister who braided flowers into her siblings' hair. I was a woman who learned to find beauty in exile, who discovered that even cursed creatures could sometimes help rather than harm. I was someone who loved and lost and endured and finally found peace in ending. The stories they tell about me will outlive stone itself, but the person who lived those stories, she rests now, beyond the reach of gods and heroes alike. In this place, my hair is soft again, dark curls that catch light like captured starlight. In this place, I can look upon beauty without destroying it, can offer comfort without bringing fear. If you remember nothing else of what I have shared, remember this. We are all more than the worst thing that ever happened to us, more than the most frightening face we ever wore. Beneath every monster, there beats a heart that once knew tenderness. Beyond every curse, there waits the possibility of transformation.